Welcome everyone to The Explainer. Look, today we're going to completely shatter a massive misconception about one of the most famous thinkers in political philosophy, Thomas Hobbes, and his legendary book, Leviathan. If you've ever studied Hobbes in a classroom, you were almost certainly taught to picture his creation, the sovereign, as this terrifying absolute dictator. You know, a ruler who holds all the cards, demands absolute obedience, and has exactly zero responsibilities to the people. But what if I told you that's really only half the truth? What if I told you Hobbes actually laid the groundwork for the modern welfare state? Let's get right into it and uncover this hidden side of Hobbesian theory.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the absolute sovereign myth, look at the concept of salus popula, suprema lex, and uncover the sovereign's unexpected duties. Then, we'll tackle moral versus legal duties, look at the Lockean critique, and wrap up with modern parallels and DSP. Section 1. The absolute sovereign myth. Let's just address the elephant in the room and figure out exactly where this myth comes from. We really have to ask this provocative question first. Does Hobbes' sovereign actually have no duties? You see, if you only read chapter 18 of Leviathan, which, let's be honest, is where a lot of people stop, you see a ruler with comprehensive, indivisible, and perpetual rights. The sovereign decides on laws, justice, war, and peace. They literally hold the power of life and death, they can entirely censor speech, and they seem utterly unaccountable to the citizens. Because of this terrifying concentration of power, it's incredibly common to just assume the sovereign is an unstoppable, tyrannical force, a giant bundle of rights with absolutely zero responsibilities. But stopping at chapter 18, that is a huge mistake. Section 2, Salus Populus Supreme Lex. To get the full picture, we have to flip forward to chapter 30 of Leviathan. This is where we find a massive twist that shifts the sovereign from being a mere enforcer of rules to an actual provider for the people. Right at the very beginning of chapter 30, Hobbes establishes this central principle, salus populi suprema lex. This translates to, the safety of the people is the supreme law. And this is the guiding light for the sovereign's true responsibilities. The state doesn't just exist to hoard power. It actually exists for the ultimate benefit and security of the people living within it. So the crucial point is how Hobbes defines safety. He explicitly states that safety doesn't just mean bare survival. It isn't just about keeping you from getting harmed in the chaotic state of nature. It includes all the valid comforts and prosperity that a person can earn through legitimate industry. Having valid comforts means having a secure home, enjoying the fruits of your labor, and thriving in a functioning economy, not just constantly looking over your shoulder. Hobbes didn't just want people to barely scrape by. He wanted a prosperous, good life for them. The sovereign's actual job is to create an environment where human flourishing is possible. Section 3. The sovereign's unexpected duties. Now that we know the sovereign's goal is the prosperity of the people, let's look at what a prosperous Hobbesian state actually looks like in practice. Get ready, because these duties might completely shock you. The sovereign has to provide public education on the social contract, so people obey out of understanding, not just blind fear. They have to make laws that are clear and genuinely good for the people. They must guarantee equal justice for everyone, whether you're rich or poor. They must ensure equal taxation. They need to administer just rewards and punishments, and they've got to choose good counselors. But look at that idea of public charity. Hobbes actually argued that those who are unable to work shouldn't have to rely on the unreliable nature of private donations. Their care should be mandated by the laws of the Commonwealth. I mean, this is incredibly progressive and directly mirrors the foundations of a modern welfare state. And this brilliantly illustrates just how forward-thinking he was, especially with economics. Hobbes actually advocated for taxing what people consume rather than what they earn. Why? Because he believed that people who save their money are benefiting society by accumulating capital, so they shouldn't be penalized for that. Instead, tax the wealth they consume. When you combine this progressive economic view with state-mandated care for the vulnerable, you get a surprisingly sophisticated blueprint for governance, and this was written in 1651. Section 4. Moral versus legal duties. Okay, so if the sovereign has all these wonderful duties to the people, why do we still call them an absolute ruler? Well, this brings us to the most critical nuance of our explainer. The distinction lies entirely in how these duties are enforced. Civil law is what citizens use to enforce rules against each other in courts. But the sovereign's duties, they don't fall under civil law. They fall strictly under the law of nature. This means no citizen can take the sovereign to court and sue them for failing to provide public charity or equal justice. The sovereign is accountable only to God and to natural reason. So the duties are absolutely real, but they are moral, not legally enforceable by the public. There's literally no institutional enforcement mechanism. To make sense of why a sovereign would ever fulfill these duties without the threat of a lawsuit, think of it through the lens of enlightened self-interest. Imagine an unregulated, modern CEO of a massive company. Technically, without labor laws, they could treat their workers terribly. But a smart CEO knows that exploiting workers will eventually lead to strikes, a toxic culture, sky-high turnover, and ultimately, the ruin of the company's profits. Similarly, Hobbes argues that a rational sovereign knows that providing for the people's safety and prosperity is in their own long-term best interest. A miserable, desperate populace destroys the state from within. A happy, prosperous public, that makes for a secure, powerful sovereign.
Section 5. The Lockean Critique. Let's see how this holds up when we introduce other heavy-hitting philosophers into the mix.
This is where John Locke enters the chat. Liberal critics, primarily Locke, looked at Hobbes's model and saw a massive, glaring structural weakness. For Locke, relying on a ruler's moral goodwill or self-interest just isn't safe enough. The solution? A contractual trust. If the ruler breaks that trust by failing their duties, the citizens have the institutionalized right to rebel. But under Hobbes's model, rebellion is never justified, even if the sovereign is failing miserably. For Locke and modern democratic theorists, duties without enforceable rights and the threat of removal are practically meaningless. Section 6. Modern Parallels and DSPS. Before we completely dismiss Hobbes's concept of non-enforceable moral duties as just some artifact of the 17th century, let's bring this political theory directly into the modern world. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stunning parallel between Hobbes's framework and the modern Constitution of India, specifically Articles 36 to 51. India has what are called Directive Principles of State Policy, or DPSP. These are guidelines that the state is deeply obligated to follow to ensure the welfare of the people. We're talking things like equal justice, public health, and charity. They're declared fundamental in the governance of the country. Sound familiar? But here's the kicker. Just like Hobbes's duties under the law of nature, India's DPSPs are explicitly non-justiciable. You literally cannot take the Indian government to court for failing to perfectly achieve them. They are a moral and political obligation, not a legally enforceable right. It is the exact same architectural framework Hobbes designed centuries ago.
So we can finally put the absolute dictator myth to rest. Hobbes's sovereign is not just a tyrant. They are bound by the supreme law of the people's safety and are tasked with creating a prosperous, almost welfare-like state. The duties are incredibly real and highly structured, but they remain entirely moral, not legal. And that leaves us with a profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Is accountability without hard legal enforcement actually enough to guarantee a good society? Or does true power always require the threat of consequences? Think about that the next time you look at how your own government operates. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the foundations of our